your latest news update from Western Mass News.
Good Tuesday afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Pisano with a look at your headlines. 3 people in the hospital after an explosion at a scrap metal processing plant this morning in Springfield. Happened just before 8 at the facility on Albany Street. Fire investigators say 3 Joseph Friedman Company employees suffered minor injuries. The plant was shut down for the rest of the day. The cause of the explosion is under investigation. President Biden has officially launched his re-election bid. He released a video earlier Tuesday framing the 2024 election as a fight against Republican extremism. The president argues he needs another 4 years in the White House to fully restore the nation's character. He's facing questions about his age as he's already the oldest president in U.S. history. And local political experts weighing in on the significance of that announcement. History professor John Back from Western New England University says this election could be historic as it sets the stage for a possible rematch with former President Donald Trump, who's already announced his campaign. Back says we haven't seen a candidate who lost the presidential election rerun since the 1950s.
I'm meteorologist Jana Brown. The check of your forecast. Similar to last night, we'll get some gradual decrease in cloud cover later this evening. And overnight, skies could be mostly clear for several hours, allowing temperatures to drop back down into the low 30s with patchy frost through sunrise tomorrow morning. Wind will go light to calm, and we should start off the day tomorrow again with more sunshine. And then also, just like today, for your Wednesday, cloud cover will increase throughout the day. We'll see a couple of pop-up showers for Wednesday afternoon, and then another round of showers a few hours after sunset just before midnight. Temperatures hitting upper 50s to low 60s, and breezes will be on the light side out of the south. The next 3 days, a little change happening in our forecast. We'll have a good deal of cloud cover around on Thursday, some breaks of sun with only a low chance for a stray shower. So it is trending a little bit drier. Friday, low to mid 60s with a mix of sunshine and clouds in the morning, and then skies eventually turn cloudy by the afternoon. Then more rain coming in for this weekend. It looks like showers the chance for showers is increasing on Saturday now. Sunday, we could get a bit of a lull, and then another round of some soaking and even heavy rainfall rolls in for Monday. That rain could bring the potential for flooding across the area.
Stay with Western Mass News on air, online, and on our app throughout the day for breaking news, weather, and exclusive content.